What if the people you trusted most kept you away from a place, not because it was unsafe, but because it held a truth too powerful to ignore? Bailey Gutierrez was 61 years old, a retired nurse from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Her life had settled into a gentle rhythm. Morning walks through the desert trails, tending to her small cactus garden, and weekly calls with her former colleagues from the hospital. She believed her story was already written, that her days would be quiet and predictable. She was wrong. Her niece, Kylie Reyes, was a passionate marine biologist working in Monterey, California. Kylie was sharp, outspoken, and relentless in her pursuit of environmental justice. She married Rowan Wright, a community organizer who worked closely with coastal fishing families. Together, they bought a weathered property near the cliffs of Big Sur, a place with sweeping views of the Pacific. Every time Bailey asked to visit, Kylie would smile and say, "Not yet, Tia. The house has a gas leak issue. You'd hate it." So Bailey waited. She sent care packages, birthday cards, and homemade tamales wrapped in foil. She waited for 4 years. Then one rainy evening in February, Bailey received a phone call from a man named Braxton Myers, Kylie's lawyer. His voice carried the careful weight of someone about to change everything. He told her there had been a boating accident off the coast. Kylie and Rowan were gone. Bailey remembered sinking into her armchair without deciding to. The sound of the rain against her window was steady, indifferent, while her world collapsed into silence. 3 days later, Braxton called again. He asked to meet. His office smelled faintly of leather and old books. He handed Bailey a sealed envelope in Kylie's handwriting and told her the Big Sur property had been left to her. He also gave her a small silver key with masking tape attached. On the tape, Kylie had written in her neat block letters, "Basement. You'll understand when you get there." Bailey stared at the key for a long time. "She never let me visit," she whispered. Braxton nodded. "She said you would come when the time was right." That night, Bailey sat at her kitchen table with the envelope and the key. Kylie's words circled in her mind like a song stuck on repeat. "You'll understand when you get there." What was there to understand? That the gas leak had been worse than Kylie admitted? That she was embarrassed by the state of the house? Bailey had raised Kylie in a modest home with cracked tiles and peeling paint. Kylie knew Bailey didn't care about imperfections. The key sat untouched on Bailey's counter for 11 days before she finally booked a flight to California. Bailey's flight landed in Monterey under a sky heavy with fog. The rental car clerk printed her a paper map when she admitted she didn't trust GPS on unfamiliar roads. The drive along Highway 1 was both breathtaking and unsettling. Cliffs dropping into the restless Pacific, waves slamming against rocks like they were trying to break free. She had imagined the house as a small, weathered cottage. What she found at the end of a winding dirt lane was something else entirely. A 2-story property with wide glass windows facing the ocean, a generator shed tucked behind cypress trees, and fresh firewood stacked neatly against the wall. No signs of repair work, no gas leak remediation equipment, nothing to suggest danger. The silver key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the air was cool and carried a faint chemical sharpness Bailey recognized from her nursing days. The sterile clarity of a laboratory. The living room was sparse. Folding chairs, a plain table, no photographs, no warmth. She walked down a narrow hallway and opened a door. Her breath caught. The basement was not a storage space. It was a lab. Stainless steel freezers hummed steadily. Shelves lined with sealed sample containers bore Kylie's handwriting. A centrifuge sat beside water testing columns. On the wall, a whiteboard covered in chemical notation stretched across the room. On a desk in the corner lay binders, each labeled with the name of a coastal fishing community. Moss Landing, Half Moon Bay, Santa Cruz, Monterey. Bailey sat down, her hands trembling, and opened the first binder. Inside were water sampling records, analysis sheets, and comparison charts. Kylie's numbers showed contaminant levels far above state safety thresholds: mercury, cadmium, volatile organic compounds. But the official state records listed much lower levels. Side by side, the data was completely different. Bailey turned the pages with growing unease. Letters from Rowan described clusters of illness. Children with unexplained tremors, adults with kidney disease, fishermen with chronic respiratory problems. Regional health authorities had told them repeatedly that the water was safe. Then she found correspondence from a company called Blue Wave Environmental Solutions. At first, the letters were politely dismissive. Over time, they grew sharper, even threatening. The last one, dated 3 months before Kylie's accident, warned that unauthorized testing and distribution of non-certified reports could lead to legal action. Bailey pressed her hand against the desk. Kylie, what were you doing here? The silver key had another purpose. In a locked cabinet, Bailey found a fireproof box. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten letter addressed to her. Tia, it began. If you're reading this, something has happened. Keeping you away wasn't about the house. It was about keeping you safe. Blue Wave and the State Environmental Agency have been covering up contamination in 5 coastal communities. Hundreds of families are sick. Rowan and I have documented everything. The drive has the full report. If we're gone, find Dr. Sylvie Chartrand at Monterey Bay University. She knows. Don't let them bury this. Bailey sat frozen, the letter trembling in her hands. For 4 years, she had believed Kylie's excuses. For 4 years, she had blamed herself for being shut out. Now she understood. Kylie had been protecting her. That night, Bailey slept poorly on a folding couch upstairs, listening to the waves crash against the cliffs. By morning, she had decided. She wasn't leaving until she understood everything. Bailey spent the next morning combing through Kylie's binders, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a notebook filling with shaky handwriting. The deeper she went, the clearer it became. Kylie and Rowan hadn't been documenting an accident. They had been building a case. That evening, as the sun dipped into the Pacific, Bailey heard gravel crunching outside. Her heart raced. Headlights swept across the living room wall, then cut out. A car door closed softly, too softly. Another followed. A knock came at the door. Firm, but not hurried. Mrs. Gutierrez? A woman's voice called. My name is Dr. Sylvie Chartrand. I was a colleague of Kylie's. Please, it's important we speak. Bailey hesitated, then opened the door. Sylvie was in her 50s, compact and serious, wearing a university jacket over a wool sweater. Beside her stood a younger man with a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He introduced himself as Daniel Auger, a graduate student in environmental law. We didn't expect anyone to be here yet, Sylvie said, scanning Bailey's face. Rowan always said that if anything happened, you might eventually come. He was counting on it. Bailey stepped aside. Tell me everything. Sylvie set her bag on the table and unzipped it with practiced efficiency. Your niece and Rowan were building a federal case against Blue Wave and against senior officials in the State Environmental Agency. The contamination isn't historic. It's ongoing. The chemical plant upstream, the Pacific Crest facility, was never fully cleaned up. Blue Wave submitted falsified reports. The agency signed off. And every year since, toxins have been flowing into these communities. Daniel opened his laptop and turned it toward Bailey. Charts, satellite images, drainage maps. Kylie's lab records match what we've been building on the university side, he said quietly. Together, it's enough. More than enough. Bailey's throat tightened. How many people? Sylvie's jaw clenched. Our health data suggests several hundred affected individuals across 5 communities. The neurological cases in children under 12 are especially alarming. Bailey pressed her hand against the table. And Kylie knew all of this. Sylvie nodded. She was the most rigorous scientist I've worked with in 20 years. She knew exactly what she had. She was waiting until the dataset was bulletproof. She knew if they went public too early, Blue Wave's lawyers would tear it apart. Bailey sat in silence, staring at Kylie's careful handwriting on the binders. She had spent 4 years believing she was being kept at a distance because of a gas leak. In truth, Kylie had built a wall of excuses to protect her. That night, Sylvie and Daniel left Bailey with copies of the files and a secure contact number. Bailey sat at Kylie's desk until nearly 2 in the morning. She was not a scientist. She was a retired nurse who had spent decades teaching patients to listen to their bodies. She had no business being in the middle of an environmental case. But Kylie had left the letter to her. Not to Sylvie. Not to Daniel. To Bailey. She realized something about grief. It either hollowed you out or made you harder to frighten. Kylie had bet on the second. 2 mornings later, Bailey found a note tucked under the wiper blade of her rental car. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. The investigation into the accident is not closed. Go home while you still have one to go to. Her stomach tightened. She photographed the note, then brought it inside. That afternoon, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize. A man's voice, smooth and professional, introduced himself as a communications representative for Blue Wave Environmental Solutions. He said he understood she had recently inherited property near their remediation zone. He repeated the word opportunity 4 times in 3 minutes, offering to purchase the property at a fair price. Bailey listened carefully, then hung up. 31 years of nursing had taught her to hear what wasn't being said. This wasn't an offer. It was pressure. That evening, Bailey called Braxton Myers, the lawyer who had first contacted her. She explained what she had found: binders of contaminated water data, letters of intimidation, and now a direct threat. Braxton was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You need to get this out of the shadows. If Blue Wave is already circling, silence is the most dangerous option." Bailey thought of Kylie's letter. Don't let them bury this. She reached out to Rowan's older brother, a journalist named Mateo Wright, who worked for a national public radio program in Los Angeles. She hadn't spoken to him since the funeral. When she said Kylie's name, he went quiet in a way that meant he had been waiting for this call. "I have documents," Bailey told him. "Lab records, correspondence, a draft federal complaint. And I have a note left on my car that I believe constitutes intimidation of a witness." Mateo exhaled slowly. "How soon can you get them to me?" "I'm not leaving the property yet," Bailey said. "But I can send everything digitally tonight. Sylvie will show me how." "You know this will be loud, Bailey," Mateo warned. "Once we air it, there's no walking it back." Bailey's voice was steady. "My niece didn't spend 4 years building this in secret, so it could be walked back." 6 weeks later, the story aired in 2 parts on Mateo's program and its English-language partner network. The title was simple: Silent Currents: How 5 Coastal Communities Were Left to Drink Poison Water. The research credit read, primary data compiled by Dr. Kylie Reyes and Rowan Wright. Bailey sat at her kitchen table in Santa Fe, listening to her niece's name spoken into thousands of homes. She pressed her hand flat against the table and breathed. The broadcast ignited a storm. Blue Wave's communications team issued statements calling the data selectively presented. Their lawyers sent letters to the radio network, to Monterey Bay University, and even directly to Bailey. The state environmental agency announced it would conduct its own review, which environmental advocates immediately condemned as a conflict of interest. But the tide was shifting. Community leaders from all 5 coastal towns gave interviews. Parents of sick children shared medical records. A former Blue Wave contractor came forward with documentation he had kept for years, admitting he had never been comfortable with what he was asked to sign. Within 10 days of the second broadcast, the Federal Environmental Tribunal announced an independent investigation. Bailey knew she had to be there. The tribunal convened in San Francisco. Bailey sat in the public gallery, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the room sat Gerald Fitzpatrick, Blue Wave CEO, polished, confident, the kind of man used to rooms bending to his will. The chair presented Kylie's compiled data. For years of sampling records, cross-verified by university researchers, compared directly against the agency's reports. Blue Wave's lawyers tried 3 separate procedural challenges to have the evidence dismissed. All 3 were denied. Bailey watched Fitzpatrick carefully. His jaw tightened, his polished calm cracking just slightly. During a break, a younger representative from Blue Wave approached Bailey in the hallway. His voice was smooth, calculated to sound reasonable. "The company remains open to compensation arrangements. A protracted public process will be painful for everyone, grieving families included." Bailey's eyes were steady. "My niece died 4 months after Blue Wave threatened her to stop testing water. The RCMP has not closed the accident investigation. I would choose your next words very carefully." The man faltered, then walked away. 8 weeks later, the tribunal delivered its preliminary findings. The Pacific Crest facility had never been fully remediated. Blue Wave had submitted falsified reports for 11 consecutive years. 3 senior officials in the state environmental agency had knowingly signed off. Gerald Fitzpatrick was referred to federal investigators for criminal charges. Emergency water infrastructure was ordered for all 5 communities within 18 months. A full health assessment for residents was mandated and funded. The RCMP reopened the investigation into Kylie and Rowan's accident. The findings, poor road maintenance, questionable truck safety records, were not conclusive proof of deliberate harm. But the shadow of suspicion remained. Bailey carried that uncertainty every day. Yet the work Kylie and Rowan had built was now federal record. Their names were on it. That spring, Bailey returned to the Big Sur property. It no longer felt like a secret, no longer a place of shadows. With Sylvie's guidance, She applied to convert the house into a registered community environmental monitoring station in partnership with Monterey Bay University and the 5 coastal towns. The application was approved in June. They named it the Reyes Wright Environmental Trust. Bailey stood beside Sylvie as the sign was placed at the entrance. Daniel snapped a photograph. From the wide glass windows, the Pacific stretched out, vast and indifferent. The same water that had carried toxins into families' lives now watched with vigilance. Children came to the opening ceremony. One girl, 9 years old, wore a bright yellow jacket. She handed Bailey a card she had drawn herself. A woman with gray hair standing in front of a house with big windows. Underneath, in careful handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for not going home." Bailey placed the card on her wall back in Santa Fe. She still spoke to Kylie sometimes, the way grief softens into something quieter than agony, but deeper than ordinary sadness. She told her about the trust, about the quarterly reports now published openly, untouchable, about the families who finally had clean water. She had once believed that keeping secrets was betrayal. Now she understood. Sometimes it is protection, the exhausting kind built out of love. Kylie had carried the burden alone, shielding Bailey from danger. Bailey realized she was tougher than Kylie knew. But perhaps Kylie had known that too. That's why she left the key. People asked Bailey what she would have done if she had simply sold the property without opening the basement door. She answered honestly, she almost did. Grief is heavy. Unanswered questions are heavier. But Kylie had written, "You'll understand," on a piece of tape, and Bailey had spent her life teaching patients that words matter, especially when they're among the last ones someone leaves behind. She understood now. Justice rarely arrives with fanfare. It comes in tribunal reports filed on ordinary Tuesdays. It comes in a mother's phone call saying her child finally has a name for what made her sick. It comes in a child's drawing taped to a kitchen wall. The lesson Bailey carried, and the one we are left with, is simple. The people we love sometimes protect us by keeping secrets, not because they doubt our strength, but because they hope we'll be brave enough to carry the truth when the time comes. The key they leave you is never just about a door. It's about whether you trust them enough to open it. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the bravest thing is not knowing what comes next, and going anyway.